This is episode 526 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, I talked to you on this show about my recent trip to Texas and figured I would write something up about it. I knew that when I wrote something nice about Texas.
The T word, Paul, the T word. We don't like the T word here in New Mexico.
Yeah, I knew I was going to get some blowback there. But anyway, I'll briefly go into the article. It ran in the Sunday Albuquerque Journal and some other papers around the state. I referenced the Trevor cartoon that had the circa 2030 New Mexicans heading across to Texas for gas-powered vehicles, while Texans come to New Mexico for abortions and marijuana. I kind of played upon that in the article and noted Texas has a variety of more free market policies, smaller government, no income tax, right to work, also happens to be fast growing. I talked about the construction and how much is going on in the state of Texas, privately, public, in terms of those roads and et cetera. I also noted something that we really don't talk about too much on this particular show, but I do think you can tell a lot by a state by its rest areas. And New Mexico's got a lot to be desired when it comes to our rest areas, especially compared to Texas. So I mentioned that, and let the deluge of emails and nasty comments commence.
Yeah, and just Paul, I did look at the blog post that had picture of a Texas rest area compared to a New Mexico one, and let me just say you did provide photographic evidence of the point that you made, and it is interesting. You know, you would think that would be. We have a lot of government money, and we talk a lot about where it gets spent, and you would, I don't know, that could be one that might be a little bit higher priority than some things that are built. You know what? Maybe even more high priority than an expensive trail next to the railroad tracks in Albuquerque. But I digress. So,
yeah, well, we could go a lot of different directions, but I'll keep it relatively on topic. And New Mexico, I think, has a poverty mentality, even though we do not have a poverty of state government funding and local government funding to the extent that we have poverty in New Mexico. It's just individuals, and unfortunately, the money from the oil and gas industry has not circulated down to overall economic strength and improvements in day-to-day lives of New Mexicans. The rest area thing, having traveled extensively throughout New Mexico, I-25 in particular, the rest areas are minimalist and not in a great condition. I-40 has a little bit of improvement. I-40 is one of the very, very most important interstate highways across the entire country. Of course, it follows in many respects, the old Route 66. So it is a very important, road. And, when you talk about commerce and people in the United States for 250, maybe more years of history before we became a country, east to west is the mode of travel that really makes the United States go. And it would be something that would behoove us to have not just rest areas and improved facilities in a state that's not heavily populated, without many options often off the interstate. Texas just has much prettier, much better lit, more information, cleaner rest areas. And That is one notable difference. And it's not that Rio Grande Foundation is going to be individual liberty and limited government, but Cadillac rest areas. No, we are just
just saying.
just saying, yes. And I do want to read here's a couple of comments from, these are some of many comments. One is, like Texas, move. Oh, actually, let's see. I read your article in the Albuquerque Journal. You don't think Texas has issues? Try this one. Highest insurance, sick people in the country. You're biased and have bleep views. A lot of other variables. Thank God you are in control of the world. Blank you. Why would New Mexico follow Texas into the depths of autocracy? The Texas Taliban is an existential threat to the U.S. Constitution. Texas is chipping away at constitutional rights since it's voting in abortion. Texas supports Orange Jesus and rejects law and order. Like Texas, move. And then on a more positive note, because there were plenty of positives, there needs to be more of a spotlight put on the condition of rest stops along the interstate highways in New Mexico. For a state that spends millions of dollars attracting tourists, why do we have such poor traveling accommodations? Our primary and secondary highways that complete the journey to our attractions could use more than a 55-gallon drum chained to a tree and a rickety picnic table. A memory from the 80s traveling to Carlsbad. Well, I can assure you that memory, having just went to Carlsbad and traveling around the state, that is a common rest area outside of the interstate system.
Except Paul, now there isn't the 55-gallon drum chained to a stake. There's just, pull off here and then there's signs that say don't litter. It's like, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the final comments edited, maybe MLG can enlist Antoine Predock to design a whole series of rest stops. So that is the designer of the glowing tumbleweed
on
the new road. He's being obviously facetious. But anyway, look, I know and have read my New Mexico history and recently visited the Alamo. So I know a little bit about the Texas history and independence. I know that there are historical reasons why New Mexicans are skeptical of Texans and Texas. I don't think many Texans are at all aware of that history, not because their schools are so much worse, but because they're too busy thriving and boosting their state and their economy to really care one way or the other. New Mexicans, I think it, unfortunately for many people, it does come from a place of envy and or just a long-term grudge. And, whether you are a big fan of Texas or not, I think it's worth looking at their policies and seeing why they're one of the fastest growing states in the country and why that dynamism is really working for their benefit in the state of Texas. So that's my final statement on that issue.
All right, good.
But go ahead.
In the words of Forrest Gump, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Exactly.
And then, Paul, you hit the nail on the head. Is like we are not advocating, or at least I don't believe we are, here on Tipping Point, New Mexico, that we need to love all things Texas. But as we look at our surrounding states that are thriving far beyond what they are in New Mexico, we certainly could take a look at some of their policies and the impacts those are having. So that is the point on that one. So,
yeah, it's Arizona is also thriving, much more free market. Utah as well. And then you get into, they're all Mormons and they have a different culture. Okay, fair enough. Colorado has a constitutional amendment to limit government spending, and they also have long outperformed the state of New Mexico. So you're always going to get pushback from somebody, no matter who you point to. And it's, look, when you're 400 or 500 pounds and you have somebody telling you should lose weight, exercise more, eat better, do this, do that, nobody enjoys that feeling. And if you will, I am in the role of the trainer of New Mexico. Maybe not yelling, maybe just suggesting numerous ways that New Mexico can get on the side of growth and prosperity and stronger educational performance, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess for the time being, because unfortunately, the voters, at least the majority, seem to prefer status quo over better and more success.
Yeah, and then Paul, let's put it this way: you don't get a lot of other states coming to New Mexico to see how we're doing it, so they can implement our successes back in their state. So, unfortunately,
Yeah, our governor was in Kansas recently, and I look at that and say, well, you could do worse than looking at Kansas, but when I look at the states that are really knocking the cover off the ball, look, there are geographical considerations to be made. Anybody who thinks Kansas has a more pleasant climate and that it is a more attractive state, just generally speaking, than New Mexico is crazy.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about Texas, though. Texas is a very big state. It does have a lot of oil. So do we. It does have port facilities and water. But again, New Mexico is one of, I believe, the top 5, or at least at the very least, top 10 states in terms of climate and overall conditions that people want to be around in the United States. And we never have been able to really harness that outside of a few decades post-war, where New Mexico was really booming from large infusions of federal dollars.
yes, and there was a time when we were considered in the same breath as Colorado and Arizona in terms of the sizes of our states, the progress that we had made post World War II. But those days are long gone. So we are in a way different category. We're in the North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming. For different large Western states, but population not growing, and definitely struggling on the thriving index as well.
Yeah. Now, when journalists, and of course there's journalists, and then there's nonprofit journalists with an agenda that transcends any reporting that they do. And Searchlight New Mexico has done some fairly decent reporting over the years. There's no question they come at it from a very far left-wing agenda. They recently did a story that caught my attention, asking, is Michelle Lujan Grisham green enough? Now, Wally, you and I were not quoted in this article. Instead, they quoted Mariel Nanasi and a bunch of the most radical environmental advocates in the state of New Mexico. And I'll give you one guess. Do they think Michelle Lujan Grisham is green enough? If you are paid as an environmental organizer and supporter, what do you think?
The answer obviously is no, but it's like asking a government employee whether they think their salaries and benefits are adequate. They're like, of course. Why wouldn't you say no? So the answer is absolutely no. And I will say for Searchlight, they take a more systematic, maybe rational approach to things with regard to the environment, but their underlying assumptions are the biggest questionable. They build these pretty elaborate structures in a lot of their arguments, but a lot of times they're built on a foundation of just very wishful and shaky thinking, and this is another one. So if you don't know anything about the underlying aspects, you read that article and you think, well, that sounds like a really good way to go. But when in fact, not so much. The math doesn't work out, the science doesn't work out, the technology doesn't work out for what their plans are going to be. So they come up with, we need the governor to be even more green. let's make gasoline $20 a gallon. Let's make electricity so expensive that we can't afford to keep ourselves cool in the summer. They don't talk about any of the of those things, much less the fact that what's going on with wind and solar, and is that really all that environmentally green to begin with? They just assume that it is and go from there.
If I had to actually summarize the real conflict here, it is that, and so there is the in-state advocates versus national advocates, and of course, when you're focused exclusively on New Mexico, you're going to want to push as hard and as far as you possibly can. When you are a national advocate, you do have to compare reality among the 50 governors. And, while there's no question, objectively speaking, that our governor follows Gavin Newsom in California very closely, certainly the left, I'm sure, would love to see Gavin Newsom and our governor move even further. If nobody's doing that, you can't go that far. And secondly, we have a huge dependency on oil and gas, and this governor is balancing the reality of that dependency with her green goals. And she has, we're now here in the second term, getting deeper and deeper into it. And, she really hasn't done a lot to undermine the oil and gas industry and the money that flows in. Now, people in the industry will say, she's done this, that, and the other, and she has undoubtedly, but production remains at or near record levels in the Permian Basin and in New Mexico as a whole. So whatever she's done, even whatever Joe Biden's done, hasn't resulted in a massive collapse in the industry here in New Mexico. And, the governor is trying to balance that reality. And I'm not trying to praise her through faint criticism, but I think it would be politically suicidal, even in blue state New Mexico, to really try to go after the oil and gas industry in some substantive way. And, that's the goal. That is the goal for the radical left-wing environmental groups in the state of New Mexico. They see the oil and gas industry as the big fish that they want to go after. And, to her credit, I suppose I will give her this, that she has not really gone after hammer and tongs oil and gas. Maybe Martin Heinrich, Governor Heinrich, would be more creative and be more dedicated to that. And I guess that would fulfill their radical goals. I don't know how it'll work out for the state of New Mexico, though.
Yeah, and Paul, there's the whole thing about, just talking a little bit about some kind of foundational assumptions, is that oil and gas is going away soon. Wind, solar, and batteries is all that's going to be required by 2030. 7 short years from now, or pick a number. There's lots of them out there. And then you have the fact that that's not reality, and the fact that oil and gas for lots of things, including airline travel and over-the-road trucking and container ships, is going to be around for a long time, and that the safest, cleanest, most efficient producer of that just happens to be right here in the United States. So I don't know where all of this comes from, but yeah, the environmental left is also really fired up on a negative against the governor's kind of hydrogen plans. That's anathema to them. They don't like hydrogen. They don't like carbon capture. Like I say, they are if you call wind, solar, and batteries a 2 or 3 trick pony, that's all they care about. That's their only solution. When other things, if you really do care about carbon dioxide emissions and the fact that we would certainly not like to have, Armageddon style meltdown of our economies, things like nuclear, carbon capture, hydrogen, if they're not part of the solution, I just don't see how you'll make any progress if you think carbon emissions are an important thing. So But that's where we stand. So they're pushing hard. Anything that's not wind, solar, and battery, they don't like.
Yeah. Now, a couple of housekeeping items, one of which we'll discuss in a little more detail. I sat down with KOAT Channel 7 to discuss the mayor's proposed bike trail with the glowing tumbleweed. That story aired last week. And I also discussed something we didn't discuss. So more coverage of the bike trail last week, last conversation you and I had, Wally. But we didn't really talk at all last episode about the United Soccer Stadium. Of course, Rio Grande Foundation was one of very few, certainly the only ones criticizing the proposed United Stadium tax ballot issue, $50 million for the stadium that was on the ballot. And we wound up being victorious on that. And there were other community groups and others who opposed it, but we opposed the idea of taxpayer financing on principle, and we're gratified to see an overwhelming majority of local voters join us in opposing that. Well, the mayor, as we kind of figured, wasn't going to go quietly into that good night. He is going to continue to push for a stadium. Now, he has corralled $13.5 million in state funding. Again, this is just a great indicator that the state of New Mexico has more money than it knows what to do with, and it's just going to waste our tax dollars. But 13.5 million is a big chunk of $50 million, and it's a big chunk of money that could be used in so many other productive ways, like reconstructing our roads, improving our bridges, et cetera, et cetera. But I digress. The mayor says he is going to use a portion of a parking lot at Balloon Fiesta Park that's adjacent to some high tension power lines where balloonists avoid. The question I have is how much parking is this stadium going to take up? Is that going to be a problem? What other uses could there be for this particular land? We're supposedly in the midst of a housing crisis, and that area over near Alameda here in Albuquerque is very favorable to potential housing. So, what are the parameters of this situation? Finally, is there a chance, if we have cost overruns, that the city of Albuquerque is going to be on the hook for all this? So I very strongly believe these issues should be vetted at Albuquerque City Council with a final up and down vote on the stadium. And the same should be said for the bike trail. We should have full vetting and discussion, and city council should be asked for an up or down vote. We never got that with the ART, which is kind of the most notable boondoggle of recent years in Albuquerque. But this is all relating to the soccer stadium, and we'll see. The mayor says we could break ground by winter, which is fine and dandy if we get some of those questions answered and have satisfactory answers to them.
Yeah, this whole soccer thing, Paul, is very interesting to me. Soccer is it is the fair-haired child. It is the I don't know, what do you call it? It's the most politically correct sport, and we're going to do everything we can to support it. I don't think that it's a bad thing, far from it, to have soccer in Albuquerque. But as we look at what else we could do with money, there's been talk of some sort of arena, if you will, indoor, that would be able to supplement and maybe even replace Tingley Coliseum for major concerts and the like. We have our $80 million trail. We have a lot of things going on. And, I do think that getting the citizens of Albuquerque involved would be just a fantastic thing. That makes it part of, what we as Albuquerqueans are doing, not these projects that seem to be just so easily and readily forced on us. And you're right. Just in terms of full disclosure, the mayor at the time that ART was built certainly didn't do that. Mayor Richard Berry, he rammed that through. And what is that? Is ART, has that made all the difference? Is that just the wonderful project Was that the shining star that it was purported to be? You know, maybe it is. Maybe there's people who absolutely love that. But as I drive up and down Central and I see the trash on the ART platforms, you know, and the few people that are riding those buses, that seemed like that was an awful lot of money for a very moderate return on investment. And what about these others? And then the final thought is, you know, the glowing tumbleweed sounds like a pejorative award that you would give to projects. And so they need to be careful about the glowing tumbleweed. So it's one of those, who would have thought there could be something maybe that could be more pejorative in terms of questionable uses of taxpayer money than the rail runner or the spaceport. But maybe the glowing tumbleweed will be it.
You are very generous to ART, Wally. I'm very impressed by your ability to soft pedal how much of a debacle that particular project
I know that,
was.
you know, who loved it, Paul? The contractors that did the project.
Oh,
I know
absolutely.
they loved it. I know they loved it.
Yeah.
But, and there may be others. I just haven't found them, you know, and I actually know businesses along Central that the owners of these businesses were, what shall we say, very much towards the left side of the spectrum, and between ART and COVID treatment and whatever, they've maybe come around thinking that maybe limited government and a little freedom might not be a bad thing for business here in Albuquerque. So,
Yeah, I mean, certainly the lockdowns of COVID and that kind of issue played a role as well, but it was the classic 1-2 punch of the construction and the lack of return on Central and the buses, and then the COVID lockdowns, both of which, you know, these are entirely politically driven disasters in our city. And it just, these are not just things we discussed in retrospect. We criticized the ART before anybody knew about it. We criticized it when Barry was pushing it and pushed back against him, and we criticized the ART throughout the construction and now post construction phase of that project. And we have been correct, as we were on the COVID lockdown situation, every step of the way. Alas, we have largely been ignored because finances and the desire to, I don't know what R.J. Barry's desire was. I really don't know. I can't imagine it was as simple as just paying off friends in the construction industry. I know he's from that industry, but boy, that is a venal approach to governance. I just, to this day, cannot understand what R.J. Barry was thinking with that. But we got to move on. Our Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury is doing some virtue signaling out on Twitter. Hollywood executives are saying the demands of the writers and actors, they're on strike, if you haven't noticed, aren't realistic. And then she touts the salaries of Walt Disney, $24 million for the CEO. Netflix CEOs made $51 and $50 million. Comcast CEO, $32 million. Paramount, $32 million. And says, stop saying you cannot afford to pay your actors and writers fair wages. Now, Rio Grande Foundation is not at all involved in this strike. If you ask me personally, I think the actors and the strikers have a lot of arguments in their favor. However, it is deeply ironic that Stansbury and every Democrat in the state of New Mexico strongly supports the ongoing use of New Mexico taxpayers to support these very same companies, Walt Disney Company, Netflix, Comcast, Paramount, through the Hollywood Film Subsidy Program that we shovel more taxpayer dollars into on an annual basis and seem to have no end in sight to the amount of subsidies that we're willing to put into that. You know, that money goes to the CEO, right, Melanie?
Oh,
Stansbury?
exactly. And it's interesting. So, Paul, we've had more than a decade of film subsidies in a big way in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And have we once heard, oh, these media companies, they don't pay their workers enough. They just, it's all been, oh, this is the best thing. There's no downside. This is the only thing that New Mexico has going for us. This is what we need to do, and be quiet about any return on investment calculations, much less what anyone makes. And now we have a strike, and they get to do that. And guess what, Paul? When the strike is settled, and it will be settled eventually, maybe it'll be soon, maybe it'll be a long time in the future. But when it does, I have a feeling that all criticism of anything in the film industry will be politically verboten here in New Mexico once again.
Yeah. Of course, right now, the longer they stay out on strike, the more money New Mexico saves relative to what it would spend on these subsidies. I believe it was $150 million in reduced corporate income tax revenues as I looked at the state budget. And yes, this information is indeed put into the state budget where they specifically have a line item. Yeah, $144.9 million in fiscal year 2024.
In negative income taxes, meaning, income taxes that aren't paid because of the film subsidy.
Because they have to get that money from somewhere, so it comes directly out of the corporate income tax revenue line item of the budget. Now they'll throw out, we got all this spending flowing in here, et cetera, but the amount of tax money generated by that spending is the apples to apples comparison, and we're always in the negative on that. But maybe we'll see a shift. It'll be interesting to watch if this strike continues to play out.
Yeah, and to just second, I think that as strikes go, when there's been major technological upheavals in the entertainment industry, there have been periods of strike to do that, heaven forbid. Going from when there was radio to then television, or radio and then movies and then television, the internet and streaming, and now artificial intelligence and a lot of likenesses and other things. So, yeah, there's definitely issues out there. The other thing that that I've been attuned to, but I haven't really seen too much reporting on it is, this is a hugely important industry. California is like, oh my goodness, we got to get this strike over. It's going to bankrupt our state, kind of talk. There's not really been a lot of reporting on the businesses and the people working in the industry here in New Mexico. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. So,
yeah, interesting point. Yeah, hadn't really, there's been some talk and a lot of posturing by politicians on behalf of the labor side of things, but not a lot of discussion of any real harm. Although there were some strikers protesting, picketing at Netflix over in Mesa del Sol. But again, Mesa del Sol is kind of a out of the way place for any activity. It's not something that most people who don't go to a concert or don't live or work out at Mesa del Sol don't go out there. It's just something that out of sight, out of mind for most New Mexicans.
Now, when Paul is compared to COVID, when COVID shut down small businesses, they were very vocal here in New Mexico about it. So maybe there's some political correctness that I don't understand, that if you speak out as a small business, about the strike, because it's going to be those contracts are let by the media companies, you won't be on the short list to get those contracts again when the industry opens up. But again, on the business side of these quote spin-off businesses that are purported, and I do believe do exist in pretty good numbers in New Mexico, really quiet.
All right. Another report slams New Mexico's education system, K-12 education system specifically. This is not a surprise to us at all. Wallet Hub put us at 51st. And if you look at the numbers in the report, we are 51st with a bullet. We're well below number 50. I think the most interesting thing Wallet Hub does is not reiterate what we already know. It is they have a plot chart showing states by how much they spend and then their performance. And in recent years, New Mexico has consistently been among the high spending, weak school systems, which is I think safe to say the very worst place to be. I mean, if you're going to have a mediocre school system at a low price, we can debate whether that is good or bad or indifferent. Whether that money would be perform better if you spent more money. But according to Wallet Hub, we spend the 20th most and get the 51st results, which is no bueno, as they say. So this report is a high quality report. It does include some safety components, which New Mexico does better than 51st in, but not particularly great. And it's just more fuel to the fire that we should be out picketing and carrying torches in the streets. In many states would be if they consistently appeared at 51st in these kinds of reports on education.
Yeah, and then as I read your post, Paul, and took a look at that chart, the 20th in spending, 51st in achievement, that's in absolute terms. So just keep in mind, just to throw 4 out there, Illinois, New York, California, Connecticut all have significantly higher cost of living. And so if you normalize our 20th spending for cost of living, I have a feeling we don't fare even better than, 20. So we're spending plenty of money. We're just not getting plenty of education.
Absolutely not. And transitioning from that, Rio Grande Foundation is hosting a day-long free education event in Albuquerque at St. Pius X High School, in which we'll discuss all manner of education reform options. September 22nd, look on our website, Errors of Enchantment, as well as the events page on riograndefoundation.org if you'd like to attend that. We also have a luncheon discussing taxation and income taxes. It is from Brian Dimitrovich. He is at the Laffer Center. He was a past guest on this particular show, and his topic, again, taxes have consequences on income tax history of the United States. He works with Arthur Laffer at the Laffer Center. The event is being held August 8th at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center here in Albuquerque. So tickets are available, including lunch, and I hope folks can come and see what he has to say.
All right, Paul, that's, I think, 2 podcasts in a row where you got Laffer out before me, so I'm slipping.
Oh, well, we'll get back on that horse next week. I'm sure we can get you an Arthur Laffer reference. So we didn't even really talk in detail about the GRT this week, but that's okay.
That is okay. So the drinking game will continue. So we at least mentioned the GRT. So if you have your cup of coffee or your shot of tequila, you can now take a drink. So
there you go. All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.